Chapter 938. The old scholar stood at the door and bowed. Greetings, Sect Master Lu. I am Lu Sheng. Both parties reunited after a long separation. One called the West Continent brother while the other called himself a junior. As the scholar and the Daoist priest did not use their inner thoughts, the girl heard them clearly. She frowned instantly. Sect Master Lu? Sect Master? Could this young Daoist priest who called himself Immortal Technique Body actually be someone from the pugilistic world? Otherwise, who would dare to establish a sect on the mountain? Chapter 939. In the kingdom of Dream Liang, the ancestral mountain of the Yellow Millet sect, which was the neighbor of the Rosy Cloud Mountain, was called Lu Mountain. It was located in Biei district of the Huaiyan prefecture of the kingdom of Dream Liang. Ever since the Yellow Millet sect bought the clothing belt peak in the mountains to the west of the former location of the Pearl Grotto Heaven as a place to descend, they seem to have gone from having bad luck to having good luck. First, they used a pouch of winter greeting money to buy passage, then they used the remaining pouch of victory money to buy the clothing belt peak from the Dali Imperial Court. The price had increased by several times. Afterwards, their senior uncle, Liu Hongwen, who was basically sent to the clothing belt peak in the past, got acquainted with the Luo Po mountain. It was said that even the mountain lord, Chen Pinggan, had to respectfully refer to him as Old Immortal Master Liu. Moreover, their senior uncle and the guardian of the Luo Po mountain, Chen Lingjun, were extremely good drinking buddies. Their senior uncle had even attended a few night feasts on the cloud-draping mountain, so he had become familiar with Wei Shanjun no matter what. In their senior uncle's words, I, Liu Hongwen, would always sit in the front row at Wei Shanjuan's night feasts. When have I not been below nascent soul? My seat was the closest to the front. Of the gods of the mountains and rivers sitting in the row opposite me, two of them were the righteous gods of the Embroidery River, and one of them was the Lord City God of the Dragon Province. In the court of the Dali Imperial Court, which one of them was worse? In the kingdom of Dream Liang, even the Five Mountains Mountain Lord with the highest godhood could sit beside the water god of the Embroidery River. Chapter 940. When the Lu Mountain Ancestral Hall received the paper kite's message, a flying sword was immediately sent to this pavilion. With a flash of sword light, Gao Zhen frowned slightly. He closed his fingers and caught the messenger flying sword. After reading the contents of the letter, he was shocked, stunned, and then delighted. Then, an uncontrollable smile appeared on his face. Huang Tsong didn't ask anything. This time, it was Gao Zhen's turn to hesitate. He smiled and said, "Your Majesty, please wait for a moment. We can't wait for a certain message. In any case, Your Majesty didn't lose anything. Just wait. Consider it a return gift from our Yellow Millet sect." Gao Zhen walked out of the pavilion and left directly on his flying sword. Chapter 941. Inside the pavilion, the atmosphere was much more harmonious. When they heard that Daoist Lu from the Autumn Hare Temple was actually a distinguished guest who climbed the mountain with Mountain Lord Chen, they fell silent. Of course, they didn't dare to believe it. However, no matter how unbelievable it was, they had to believe it. After all, who would dare to fake something like this? The female cultivators who were originally lazy all became serious. When they looked at the young Daoist, they felt that he was even more handsome. The young Daoist was like a storyteller at the foot of the mountain as he began to reminisce about the past. Although Mountain Lord Chen and I didn't come from the same hometown, we were friends who went through thick and thin together. If I were to put it in a more elegant way, it would be the first time we met. At that time, Mountain Lord Chen and I had yet to make a name for ourselves. Then, we hit it off and went on a long journey together. We once slept at a Xing Wang temple and sleepwalked to the Department of Wealth and Honor, where we met the Judge of Wealth and Honor who wore a purple robe and a jade belt. Chapter 942. What a do as you please. Sure enough, sword cultivators were unrestrained in their actions. Just as Chen Pinggan was about to leave the pavilion, Lu Chen smiled and said, "I heard that Qingping Sword Sect has a silken mist mountain." Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "Celestial Capital Mountain is the main mountain, Silken Mist Mountain and Steaming Cloud Mountain are auxiliary. This is the layout of the three mountains. Since Kui Dongshan is the leader of a lower sect, he naturally has his own plans. According to Kui Dongshan's words, since the world is going to change, one should plan ahead and plan early. Chapter 943. Lu Chen followed him out of the pavilion. The words 1,000 years were just dream and awaken. After he walked down the stairs, he turned around and took a look. He didn't know when he would be able to visit this place again. Back then, when you were setting up the fortune-telling stall, did you already know the identity of the old master of our kill, Old Yarrow? I wasn't sure about Old Yarrow's identity back then. I could only guess. Deducing the heavenly secrets in Liju Grotto Heaven is a thankless task. It can easily backfire. Do you think Mr. Qi knew about it? Chapter 944. Returning to the demon-subduing tower in Tongye Continent, Chen Pinggan opened his eyes and stood up. Once again, he saw the tall old man. Chen Pinggan bowed to him silently. The first time was when he was brought to the peak of Sui Mountain by the teacher. The second time was when Chen Pinggan represented all the sword cultivators in the Great Wall of Sword Qi to attend the Riverside meeting. Back in his hometown, Chen Pinggan only met the Tao ancestor. He did not meet the Holy Master or the Buddha. At Sui Mountain, Chen Pinggan met the Holy Master for the first time. After that, the teacher asked him how he felt. There was nothing to hide from the teacher, so Chen Pinggan told him the truth. If he met the Holy Master in a Confucian robe in the market, he would suspect that the old man had been in Jianghu when he was young. The old scholar was happy for a long time and said that the evaluation was good, very good. Chapter 945. The Holy Master gazed into the distance and sighed with emotion. What is a hero? There are always a few things that no one else in the world can do that I can. What is a sage? There are always a few things that no one else in the world can do that I can't. Chen Pinggan blushed with shame. I'm still far from it. Lu Mang laughed. The Holy Master wasn't talking about you. Chapter 946. Pei Qian brought Zhang Yuqian and Tan Yingju to sit on the steps of Secret Snow Peak. You had finally become a true great sword immortal after her seclusion on the Wind Kite Ferry. Calling her Great Sword Immortal was already insulting. If she was called Great Sword Immortal it would be like slapping her face. Fortunately, things were different now. The chief consecrator of the Celestial Capital Mountains Green Duckweed Sword Sect was a fully deserving Great Sword Immortal. Chapter 947. A young Taoist with a lotus crown walked on the highest railing of the Beko Keikyang building. He walked slowly with his hands in his sleeves and his palms folded. He looked down and saw the 5 cities and 12 buildings one by one. There seemed to be some new faces. Lu Chen looked up at the bright moonlight. The immortals sharpened the flying mirror. 2 moons hung in the sky. Looking at the new moon, Lu Chen stopped and turned back. He continued to walk along the railing. Chapter 948. After all, senior brother Yu was still waiting for them at the Beko Keikyang building. Lu Chen was in a hurry, so he used the 3 mountains talisman with Hao Su. The mountains and rivers on the ground meandered like dragons and snakes. It was a beautiful landscape that was completely different from the vast world. The land of the vast 9 prefectures stood like mountains in the 4 seas, while the 14 prefectures of the green underworld seemed to have been separated by those great blasphemies. A dazzling sword light landed on Divine Cloud City. It was the imposing figure of the criminal official, Hao Su. Chapter 949. Li Er brought his wife and daughter and followed his son-in-law, Han Chengjiang, to the Hualing dynasty in the north of the North Continent. This was the first time the 2 families were formally visiting relatives after the marriage. Ever since the woman alighted from the carriage and arrived at her son-in-law's estate in the street called Chaozi Alley, which was wider than the main street, she started to feel ill at ease before she even stepped over the tall threshold. She didn't even know where to place her hands. Her son-in-law had previously explained the origin of this Chaozi Alley, such as how Qiao Mu was high above, Zimu Jin was low below, and some other reasoning, but the woman didn't understand, so she didn't take it to heart. However, when she heard that the entire alley belonged to their Han family, and that according to the Han clan's ancestral teachings, they were not allowed to split the family, the woman was left speechless. Wasn't her son-in-law's family too rich? Such a long alley was all surnamed Han? Just a year's worth of food wasn't a small sum, right? Just the large golden plaque at the entrance and the 2 jade white lions that were taller than a person when they squatted were already enough to give the woman a firm show of strength. When they entered the house, they walked around in circles until she was dizzy. Along the way, they didn't even touch chicken or dog feces. She didn't even dare to spit. The woman ruthlessly pinched the man's waist. The man turned his head and grinned. He reached out to hold her hand, but the woman hurriedly slapped his hand away. They were an old married couple, yet they didn't feel ashamed. If the scholars inside saw this and looked down on our YZ, what should we do? The woman could only lightly pinch her arm. It hurt, so she wasn't dreaming. Chapter 950. A thin and weak Taoist priest, wearing a felt hat, a badly sewn green cotton Taoist robe, and a pair of thick cotton shoes, walked on the road like a thin bamboo pole swaying. Beside him was a burly middle-aged man with a knife at his waist. The handle of the knife had been polished until it was shiny. The man had started growing a beard a few months ago, and soon his face was full of whiskers. The two of them walked together on the road back to their hometowns. Their hometowns were not far from each other, only 30 to 40 miles away. Both were within the boundaries of Wuling County. In fact, the Taoist priest was more than 20 years younger than the man, but because of his aged appearance, he looked at least 10 years older than the man. The key point was that although this Taoist priest did not have an officially recognized edict, he was a genuine Taoist cultivator. His friends were purely martial artists. Chapter 951. In the backyard of the Yang clan's drugstore, a female martial artist was guarding the empty backyard of the drugstore by herself. Shi Lingshan had returned to his home in the Peach Leaf Alley. Su Dian didn't feel lonely or anything. She was used to it since she was young. She felt uncomfortable with so many people around. The pharmacy was a shop in the front and a workshop in the back. The decoction and drying of herbs were all done in the backyard. The main building was Old Yang's residence. The door of the east wing was closed. Usually, Old Man Yang would only open the door when Li Huai returned to his hometown and came here for a stroll. Only the west wing was vacated long ago and given to Su's shop. Chapter 952. The provincial capital of Chu Province and the prefectural capital of Longquan Commandery were in the same city. Naturally, it was more prosperous than Red Candle Town at the confluence of the 3 rivers. She was a woman who lived in luxury after returning home. After all these years of living like a princess, she had a graceful bearing. If one only looked at her face and disregarded the crow's feet at the corner of her eyes, she would look like she was in her 30s. Praising her as a middle-aged woman would not go against his conscience at all. If one did not know her well, they would have mistaken her for a woman from a wealthy family on Fortune Street. The house was paved with earth, so there was no need for a brazier by her feet. Even the charcoal cage in her hands could be saved. In her early years, when she returned to her hometown from Qingxia Island in the Bookslip Lake, she directly bought a lot of houses in Ju City. It turned out that her decision to spend a lot of money back then was not a waste. Instead, she made a lot of money. Just the rent of those shops every year was a large sum of money. Of course, she had long since looked down on gold and silver. Only the money of immortals was money. In these years, the woman had mostly gone to the house in Huaihuang County to pay respects to her ancestors before returning to Mud Bottle Alley to sit for a while. Chapter 953. Qingming Tian, Xiandu Temple. In the peach blossom forest, an old Taoist was walking side by side with a handsome young man wearing a tiger head hat. Behind them was a fat man, who was looking around to see if there were any peach branches on the ground. The group of traveling swordsmen from the Great Wall of Sword Aura were staying at the Beko Keikyung Building, Divine Cloud City, and Xiandu Temple. Xiandu Temple was only assigned to the fat man, but the young swordsman got along well with the old Taoist. Of course, it could be that they got along well. Anyway, Yangzhou had been doing a lot of business in the name of the old Taoist all these years. Xiandu Temple was a colossal entity, and its vassal states could not be counted with one hand. In addition, there were dozens of dynasties and vassal states under Xiandu Temple. Just Xiandu Temple itself had close to 100,000 Daoist officials. Chapter 954. At the border between Yongju and Peiju, two female cultivators were strolling side by side as they ascended the mountain. The female cultivator's face was blurry, as if she was floating in the clouds. She was wearing a robe made of water and clouds. She was Wu Ju, one of the few cultivators who had participated in the last riverside meeting. Chapter 955. Located in the northernmost secret prefecture of the Qingming world, there was a lonely mountain called the Leap Moon Peak. There was a river at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was steep, the stones were like jade, and the pine trees were green. However, the spiritual energy was thin. Obviously, it was not a good place to set up a Taoist temple. The mountain and water restriction of the Leap Moon Peak was the fist aura of the martial artists. It was like a lake at the top of the mountain. The fist aura poured over the mountain like water, but it did not hurt the creatures in the mountain. Martial artists did not stop there. If the cultivators were not in the ascendant state, they should not expect to reach the top. Chapter 956. Golden Jade City, Wasteland. There was an 8-sided pavilion with a horizontal board inscribed with the words Moon's Brow. The sky was leaking and the moon was sparse, the earth was slanted and the wind was mixed. A middle-aged scholar wearing a green gown and a jasper crown gently clenched his fist. In his palm were 2 black and white chess pieces that creaked. Following this Golden Jade City's guest cultivators thought, strange phenomena appeared in this pavilion. The atmosphere was magnificent, but not the slightest bit of the world's spiritual energy flowed out of the pavilion. Chapter 957. The first day of spring. It was the beginning of all things, and all things were reborn. It was the beginning of the 4 seasons, and the beginning of the year. When Chen Pinggan returned to the demon-subduing tower from the Solar Term Institute at the peak of Sui Mountain, the Holy Master and the pure young Taoist were nowhere to be seen. Only Xiao Mo, who wore a yellow hat, green shoes, and a green bamboo cane, was left standing in the corridor on the top floor with Qing Tong, who was dressed in a green robe. Chapter 958. Dao Ran swallowed his saliva and mustered his courage to ask telepathically, "Are you really that person?" Sword Immortal Dao didn't dare to call him by his name. It was too ridiculous. Chen Pinggan smiled and replied telepathically, "Didn't I already say it at the Phosphor River? If I'm not wrong, it's me." Sword Immortal Dao just didn't believe it. "How am I supposed to believe it? I saw a young man with 2 sabers hanging from his waist, wearing a long green robe and cloth shoes, and then he claimed to be Chen Pinggan. I foolishly believed him." Chapter 959. A green gown flew out of the ancestral hall like a green waterfall, flowing from the top of the green duckweed peak to the mountain gate. Kui Dongshan cracked some sunflower seeds and smiled, "Let's postpone the meeting for a while. Let's drink some tea first." Pei Qian originally wanted to follow her master to the mountain gate to welcome Li Baoping, but the big white goose smiled and shook its head at her. Qiu Biyu, Dao Ran and the other members of the ancestral hall who just came up the mountain, as well as Yi Yunyun and the other guests, naturally felt strange. They didn't know who it was that made Mountain Lord Chen Pinggan go to the foot of the mountain, as if he could put aside any important matters for a while. He didn't even want to waste time talking at the ancestral hall. This wasn't like Chen Pinggan's usual style. Kui Dongshan's eyes suddenly brightened. "Senior sister, I know who is the biggest contributor to our fallen mountain gate." Chapter 960. The Qingping Sword Sect's landscape bulletin was placed at Steaming Cloud Mountain and Zhong Qiu was in charge of it. Kui Dongshan placed the Catoptric Deflection Bulletin on Mount Simiao instead of Ancestral Mountain, which had the best scenery, or Steaming Cloud Mountain, which was closest to the ferry. It was unexpected but reasonable. Celestial Capital Mountain was a place for sword cultivators, while Steaming Cloud Mountain was a place for martial artists to learn fist techniques. Both were very pure. Kui Dongshan laughed. Mr. Zhong, you are the accountant. Why don't you flip through the account books so that the elders of the upper sects, including me, can know what to do? He wanted to say it out loud so that everyone would be happy. Chapter 961. The old elementary scholar stepped over the threshold and waved his hand, indicating that there was no need to change seats. The old elementary scholar sat on the bench beside Kui Dongshan. Kui Dongshan's lips moved slightly, probably because he was unable to call out founder. Chen Pinggan took out a jar of wine and a set of 12 flower deity wine cups. These were the items that he had stolen from the Confucian temple. He asked Xiaomi to help him distribute the wine cups and pour the wine. The old elementary scholar took the wine cups and Xiaomi poured the wine for Old Master Wensheng. She then placed the wine jar on the bench beside Old Master Wensheng. The old elementary scholar suddenly remembered something and took out a large stack of red envelopes from his sleeves. Each red envelope contained 2 pieces of snow money. The amount of money was not much, but the words on the red envelopes were written not long ago. They were written by the old elementary scholar before he left the Merit Forest. Therefore, the old elementary scholar handed the red envelopes to Xiaomi and reminded her with a smile, "Xiaomi, don't throw these red envelopes away. They are only worth a little money and they are rare. If you need money in the future, go to the Aquarius Continent's Lakeview Academy or the Shunhu sect and find a buyer who knows their stuff. If the price is less than 2 pieces of snow money, don't sell them." Chapter 962. Under the bright moonlight, the group left the cloud-capturing pavilion. Pei Qian pulled Li Baoping back to her residence. Reuniting after such a long time, there were too many things they could talk about. After Chen Pinggan and Kui Dongshan's confirmation, Cao Qinglang did not have any hidden dangers. However, Kui Dongshan still suggested that Cao Qinglang should not be in a rush to officially refine the sword. She should wait until she stabilized her Jindan stage before going into seclusion at Stellar Scenic Peak. Cao Qinglang had no objections to this. Cao Qinglang left with Zhang Yuqian. Their residences were very close to each other. Walking on the quiet mountain road in the dead of night, Zhang Yuqian asked tentatively, "Senior Cao, can I talk to you about something?" Mainly because he felt that this student of junior uncle was cultured and refined. One look and he could tell that he was very capable in his studies. That's right, Senior Cao was that Dali dynasty's top scorer. Every time Master mentioned this, he would be rather happy. Chapter 963. Long Xinpu stared blankly at the handsome young man wearing the tiger head hat. Could it be? For a moment, he felt dizzy and the world was spinning. Definitely not. Even in the world, there were countless people who worshipped, admired, and were fascinated by the most prized Taoist official in the world. Long Xinpu was one of them. Moreover, this Master Long had a friend who sewed hundreds of poems by Bai Yi onto his body. If that guy saw the person in front of him, he would probably go crazy on the spot. It would be like a bolt from the blue and he would suffer a lightning tribulation. Chapter 964. The book said that all good things must come to an end, but there was no need to be afraid. The book also said that it was a small world. Note 1. The guests left the secret snow peak one after another. The largest group of people took the Tongyin ferry that had just been acquired by the Qingping sword sect and headed to Taiping Mountain. Other than the new mountain lord Huang Ting of Taiping Mountain, there was also the mountain protector Yu Fushan and the honorary protector Tan Yingju and Zhang Yuqian. Since Zhong Shanfeng was going to continue to travel around the Tongya continent, he could travel with Li Baoping who was planning to go to the driving mountain ferry. Pei Qian was going to follow sister Baoping. They were all carrying bamboo boxes and holding green bamboo staffs. They planned to go to Taiping Mountain first before going to the cloud cottage of Mount Pu. Yi Yunyun let Tan Rong and Xue Huai return to the sect first. She also wanted to go to the old site of Taiping Mountain to take a look. Zhong Kuei and Yu Jin also wanted to follow. When Zhong Kuei was still a gentleman in the Dafu Academy, he was already very familiar with Taiping Mountain. As for the fatty, he had his own reasons to be the flower protector. Yuan Ling Hall looked like he didn't need to protect his junior brother anymore. Yuan Ling Hall left the Tongya continent first. However, he didn't return to Tiandi Peak. Instead, he went straight to the sea and went to the wasteland through the ruins of End to find his master Fire Dragon Immortal. The Tongyin ferry slowly rose into the sky. After passing through layers of clouds, it suddenly swam far away like a blue bird. Chapter 965. Beko Keikyung Building, Azure Cloud Building, Mist Cave of Zhenyu Palace. There was a young-looking cultivator. He was thin, his face was haggard, and his cheeks were sunken. His expression was solemn, and he seemed to have a lot on his mind. He sat cross-legged on the peak of the mountain and looked down at a long clay tablet. There seemed to be a prophecy written on it with iron nails. His fingers were badly mutilated. It was really a nail on the board. Chapter 966. This time, crossing the sea to return to the north, he had roughly estimated the speed of the visitor from the Luo Po mountain heading south, so he was not particularly in a hurry. Along the way, Chen Pingan practiced the escape technique of the sword technique. His figure transformed into dozens of sword lights time and time again. Above the blue waves, he used an escape technique that almost ignored the long river of time to leisurely roam the world. Accurately speaking, all the sword lights could follow some of the small water veins in the long river of time, like walking water, between the heavens and the earth, like a person entering an uninhabited place. Chen Pingan went through tens of thousands of repetitive studies, and finally, the first time he used this escape technique with Ning Yao, they were about the same level of proficiency. Perhaps this was called the clumsy bird flies first, and hard work can make up for it. They temporarily rested on an island in the sea near the Aquarius continent. Chen Pingan squatted on a tree branch, cupped his hands, and used the water technique. His palms were like spring water gushing out, and then he scooped up a handful of water to wash his face. Xiao Mo sat at the side, the green bamboo cane placed horizontally on his knees, and said, "Young master has good talent." Chen Pingan laughed angrily, "Stop saying things that go against my conscience, flattery is useless to me." Chapter 967. The snow and the moon were suitable for each other, and the youth was even more aloof. Including this guy who called himself Kui Dongshan, there were a total of 6 people. Together, they walked towards the large mansion with a 6,000-scroll library. A skinny monk-like man walked at the front, using his feet to clear the path so that the woman's embroidered shoes wouldn't be soaked by the snow. The woman named Wang Manmeng claimed to be at the sea viewing realm, but she didn't like to be addressed as a fairy. The skinny man had once flattered a horse and received a slap. Along the way, she chatted idly with the handsome youth who called himself Kui Dongshan. Of course, a woman who came from a wild cultivation background hid many delicate thoughts under her flower-like smile. It was similar to the road under the snow. It looked snow-white and flawless, but if you really used your feet to push it aside, you would see that it was muddy. Chapter 968. In the snowy night, a group of 5 people walked towards the city gate in the snow. The mountains and rivers of the continent were mostly like these ghost cities that were dilapidated and uninhabited. They were like skeletons that had not yet decayed. When the wind swept past the city, it was like a bone flute. A thin young man with long eyebrows and a cold appearance. He held a knife under his armpit. The young man held a tightly squeezed snowball in his hand. He tossed it with his left and right hands. The old man was tall and sturdy. His footsteps were steady, but he kept coughing, as if he could not stand the cold. Chapter 969. Sorry, update late. The snow was white, and his clothes were white like snow. It was as if he was a snowman. Qin Buyi felt that this person was a little familiar, but she couldn't match him even after carefully searching her memory. Kui Dongshan and Qin Buyi squeezed out a big, bright smile. Then, they lowered their voices and begged old Senior Song to move and watch the battle with him from a distance, lest the 2 martial artists of the ultimate state couldn't display their skills in this mountaintop querying fist. Then, he took Wang Manmeng and the others away from the city gate. Kui Dongshan planned to choose the roof of a big mansion as the place to watch the battle. However, in this windy and snowy night, the snow was heavy and the wind was strong, so their vision was blocked. Qian Monkey and the others were too weak, so they were destined to not be able to see the two sides clearly. Kui Dongshan had tampered with the conversation between Mr. and Han Wanzhan, so Wang Manmeng couldn't hear it clearly. When they found out the identities of the two sides in the future, they would regret it to death. The two sides faced each other on the street, not in a hurry to make a move. Chapter 970. They sat on the railing of the arched bridge, just like in the past. Chen Pinggan suddenly said, "I once heard an incredible conjecture, saying that the world we live in has actually cycled countless times, and it's a kind of repetition that doesn't change at all. All living things and dead things are in a tribulation. When the tribulation rises, the world is born, and when the tribulation falls, the world is destroyed, and then it starts again. The cycle is repeated without any difference. However, there are different opinions about the number of years of this tribulation. Some say it's 30,000 years, some say it's 100,000 years, or even longer. Therefore, later generations have the saying that it's hard to escape the tribulation. The sages have already said it, but they can't see through it. Is it really like this?" She quietly listened to Chen Pinggan's words. When the latter asked, she smiled and said, "It's a good idea. It's new and interesting, but it's far from the topic. It's ridiculously wrong." Chapter 971. Snow covered the entire mountain. The ground was white and the wind was cold. In the snowy peak, the sound of branches breaking could be heard. In this celestial capital mountain, other than the sect leader Kui Dongshan, the only one who could freely enter the grotto heaven was the right guardian of Luo Po Mountain, Zhu Mili. Even the head consecrator Miu and the head consecrator Kui Wei, who were the masters of two potential sword immortals, had to register if they wanted to enter the grotto heaven. Early in the morning, Bai Xian held the Yixing clay teapot and brewed a pot of wolfberry tea for himself. Although he was tricked by Jing Qing, he got used to it. Bai Xian raised his head and took a big gulp of wolfberry tea. Then, he said to Xiao Mili, who was sitting across the table, "Right guardian, my heart is bitter. When it comes to drinking tea, I am an experienced connoisseur." Xiao Mili immediately said, "Then drink the wild mountain tea personally made by the old chef. It's bitter before it's sweet. This is called having a sweet taste." Chapter 972. Huaihuang County's Dragon Riding Alley turned into an ascension stage in a split second. At the top was still a woman holding a sword, while the man beside her sat on the steps. Both of them had a pair of extremely pure golden eyes. The body of the mink hat girl, Xiego, instantly dissipated like dust and then condensed into a slender woman with a brand new appearance. Bai Jing held his sword with both hands and raised his head high to meet the eyes of the two at the top. This was Bai Jing's true body and appearance. Chapter 973. A Fengyuan ferry headed south to Tongye continent. Midway, it stopped at Peach Leaf Ferry outside Mirage City. Song Yusha was still dressed in a green robe and cloth shoes. He boarded the ferry alone. According to the agreement with the Great Spring Dynasty, the ferry would help transport a batch of goods to Jade Sect's Beeching Ferry and Tsushan Ferry, which were located in the southernmost part of Tongye continent. They don't see Tiger Han and Jian Ming accompanying them. Miu looks playful. Zhu Mili hangs on the railing and kicks her legs gently. It's a pity that they still can't see the Emperor of Daquan, who Pei Qian said was as beautiful as a flower when he was a child. Pei Qian was still talking about the beautiful sister named Yaro Jinji back then. When she looked at her master's eyes, she thought that he was full of drama. After all the goods were loaded onto the ferry, the Fengyuan continued south. Chen Pinggan accompanied Song Yusha for a few drinks. Song Yusha said that the prefectural magistrate had been very busy recently and couldn't get away. The fact that Grandmaster Han was willing to take the initiative to be the imperial tutor of Great Spring shocked the entire country. Chapter 974. At the highest point of the Baek-o Kaekyung building. A young daoist with a lotus crown on his head leaned on the railing and smiled. Since he had nothing to do, he might as well look at the world from a quiet place. In the eyes of the sisters in the 5 cities and 12 buildings below, he would at least have some celestial aura. Lu Chen looked at the palace of a tall city. Someone had just received a decree from the sect master and was about to leave. He was ordered to come to the Shangqing Pavilion to meet Lu Chen. Some immortals had already sensed the trajectory of this person's ascension and were envious of this person's encounter. After all, it was an honor to be able to climb to the top of the Shangqing Pavilion and overlook the entire 5 cities and 12 buildings. Lu Chen waved at the green figure and smiled. "Celestial Lord Yang, over here, over here." The young daoist landed softly and stood in the corridor. He bowed respectfully to Lu Chen and said, "Yang Ningxing of Lingbao City greets Sect Master Lu." Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand. "No need for formalities. How many times have I said it? You can just call me Martial Uncle. Since you and Chen Pingan are good friends who call each other brothers, then you and I are best friends. There are no outsiders here, so who are you being polite to? Isn't that reasonable?" Chapter 975. Uploaded late, sorry. In the night, the Wind Kite Ferry slowly docked at the Jade City Ferry of the Jade Gui sect. This famous immortal ferry had warm mountains and soft water. The lake was like a mirror. The moonlight shone on the ground and the lanterns floated in the sky. On the ferry, everyone walked out of their cabins to enjoy the scenery. They were divided into 2 groups. On one side was Miu and Ju Mili. On the other side was Wei Wenlong, Dao Ran, Xiao Poxian, and the others. Na Lan smiled and said, "Great sword immortal am I. Looking at this beautiful scenery, don't you want to recite a poem?" As a child born and raised in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, she spoke casually to Miu. Na Lan was already polite. Yuan Zhaohua, who was hiding in the cold palace in Ascension City, used to be the king of children. She often led a large group of people of the same age to fly kites. She was closer to Miu, who liked to lie in the clouds and admire the moon. Chapter 976. Red Candle Town, the first month of the year, still had a festive atmosphere to it. As a trade hub, the various provinces of Dali had set up many guilds here. Old faces and new couplets, everyone was in a festive mood. The young shopkeeper of a bookstore was currently napping on a rattan chair. The matters of the Water Mansion had been handed over to his subordinates to manage. He had learned from Luopa Mountain's Mountain Lord Chen and become a hands-off shopkeeper. A travel-worn person crossed the threshold, cupped his fists with a smile, and said something pleasing. "Shopkeeper Li, it's an auspicious opening. I wish for your business to prosper and prosper." Li Jin saw Chen Pingan and sat up from his chair. Since both sides knew each other well, Li Jin didn't make any pretentious greetings. He didn't even stand up to greet him, only cupping his fists in return. Business is indeed going well. Chen Pingan was happy that Li Jin didn't take him seriously. He entered the bookstore and glanced at the bookshelves. His gaze stopped at one spot and asked, "Why is there a missing copy of the 27 histories and 100 generals?" Chapter 977. The spring feng shui was warm, and the scenery was charming. There were a few peach blossoms on the shore, and the wild ducks in the water chased after the clear scenery. Wang Zhu and the others went ashore in Tongye Island, ready to visit the opportunistic Yu dynasty that took the initiative to curry favor with the Water Lord of the East Sea. However, after a few steps, they bumped into the young man in white with a red mole between his eyebrows. This was the second time they met face to face. The first time was at the old site of the Great Desecration Dragon Palace. The retainers of the Water Mansion had a deep impression of this person. Of course, the one who really scared them was the sword cultivator in yellow hat and green shoes, Xiao Mo, who called the young hermit young master. His realm was so high that it was unattainable. Wang Zhu and Kui Dongshan had known each other for a long time, and they could be considered as half-fellow countrymen, so they were accustomed to it. However, Gong Yang, Huang Man and the others looked at the funny posture of that guy, and they always felt that this teenager's behavior was both disgusting and scary at the same time. They were all successful cultivators, and they were once heroes in their respective continents. They had seen a lot of strange people and strange things on the mountain, but this teenager in white standing on one leg, holding a mirror in his hand, and full of nonsense, was unique. Seeing that they didn't respond, Kui Dongshan seemed to have made up his mind. If they didn't do something, then they would be in a standoff until the end of time. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.